understand what data to be placed in the state. Okay, and then we'll also see about how we can update the styles based on the change in the state. To set the code breakdown for today's session, you need to run this and then npm install. With this, the code breakdown will be set for today's session. Okay, so let's get started. So firstly, we are going to see about identifying the state, that is what data needs to be put in the state. We'll understand more in detail about this. Okay, for this we'll take an example. Okay, you can see there's an example of an application. Okay, so here in this application you can see on the top there's a header and there's some heading and description. Apart from that, there are tab items present there, right? So there's static, responsive and dynamic. Those are the tab items. And then below that, there are a list of projects that are being displayed. So based on the tab item that we are selecting, the list of projects being displayed below are changing, right? Okay, this is what we want to achieve. Let's understand the initial code available for us. Okay, so this is the folder structure. You can see there are various components available for you before itself in the initial code. Okay, so firstly there's header, there's a component corresponding to it. So then we have tab items, right? So there's a component corresponding to the tab item, and then we have the project items. So there's a component corresponding to the project item. So in the initial code, all these components are available for you. Okay, and all these are integrated in the app component. Okay, you can see here. So in the app component, so firstly we have the header. Okay, and then we are displaying the list of tab items, and finally we are displaying the list of project items. Okay, so if you run npm start, you'll be able to see an output in this manner. Let's have a look at that. So here in the code breakdown, I have already set it for today's session. So here you can see that in the components there's header, there's project item and tab item. So all these components are already available for us. So then coming to the app component, so here you can see that in the app component, so we are displaying the header, right? Then we are displaying the list of tab items, right? And then we are also displaying the list of project items. Okay, clear? So all these are already integrated into the app component, and let's have a look at the output. Okay, so here you can see this is the output. You'll be able to see on the top this is the header, and then here these are the tab items, and we have the list of projects. But here one thing to observe is, right, irrespective of which tab item I'm selecting, the list of projects being displayed below are not changing, right? All the projects are being displayed actually. Irrespective of the category that we are choosing, the tab that we are choosing, all the projects are being displayed below. Okay, so what we have to do is, based on the tab item that we are selecting, the list of projects have to be updated. Only the projects corresponding to that category have to be displayed. That is what we have to achieve. Okay. So as we understood that in the initial code, all the projects are being displayed, but what we have to do is, based on the tab item that we are selecting, we have to filter the projects that are being displayed below. Okay. So firstly, just pause the video once, try to go through the initial code that is provided to you. So just have a look at the component structure and what props are being passed and how are they being passed. So try to get a brief understanding about that so that it will be easy for you to follow the next part of the session. Okay. So I hope you have gone through the initial code. Okay, now let's proceed. So in the initial code, so there's a tabs list and the projects list present. Okay, so in the tabs list, we have the data regarding the tab items that need to be displayed, like static, responsive and all. So you can see there. So there's a tab ID and the display text. Okay, so the tab that we want to display is static, and the text that has to be displayed is there. You can see it has to be written in that way. So we are maintaining that data in the tabs list. Okay, so now there is a projects list also, which has the list of projects. Okay, all the details regarding the projects. Okay, so each object corresponds to a particular project details. So there is title, description and various details. Apart from that, an additional detail is the category. Okay, so what category does this project belong to? That information is stored in the category key. You can see there. So the Happy Meals project. Okay, there is a title Happy Meals. You can see there, right? So that Happy Meals project is actually a static project. It belongs to the static category. Okay, so in this way, in the projects list, so the category to which each project belongs to is being maintained. Okay, and then in the tabs list, we have the list of projects that need to be displayed. Okay, these are already provided in the initial code. Okay, let's have a look at that. So here in the initial code, in the app component, you can see there's tabs list and projects list. Okay, first let's have a look at the tabs list. So here you can see that there is a static and the corresponding display text, and responsive and the corresponding display text, and dynamic and the corresponding display text. Okay, this is the tabs list. Now let's see the projects list. Okay, so in the projects list, you can see that each object corresponds to a particular project. There are various details regarding the project, okay, like title, image, description and all. Apart from this, there is category. So this particular project falls under the static category. Similarly, this also falls under static. You can see there are projects corresponding to the responsive category, right? You can see, and then there's projects corresponding to the dynamic category. Okay, all these are appropriately maintained here in the initial code itself. So we have the tabs list and the projects list. Okay, now in the render method of the app component, what we are doing, so when it comes to the tabs, so we are iterating over the tabs list and we are displaying all the tab items. Similarly, when it comes to the projects, so we are iterating over the entire projects list and we are displaying the project items, right? So here, this is the reason that all the projects are being displayed. So irrespective of the tab item, what we are doing, we are displaying all the projects present in the projects list. But actually, what do we have to do? Based on the selected tab item, we have to display only few projects that corresponds to that category, right? So we have to achieve this. So instead of displaying all the projects, what we are doing here, so we have to filter these projects based on the category and display, right? So let's see how to do that. Okay. So we understood that there's tabs list and projects list, and we have to filter the projects list based on the selected tab list ID. Okay. So here you can see that we have tab ID, static, responsive, and dynamic. So based on what tab ID the user has selected, so we have to filter the projects list and get a set of projects that have to be displayed in the UI. So when a user clicks on a tab item, so we'll know the corresponding category. Okay, then we have to filter the projects corresponding to that category from the projects list and display those filtered projects in the UI. Okay, this is what we have to do. So when the user clicks on a tab item, we have to get the category of that particular tab, okay, and then we have to filter the projects list, okay, get the filtered projects and display them in the UI, okay. These are the steps involved. So now, for this particular thing, what will be the state? Okay, that is what we have to see. As you remember, so previously we started with identifying the state. That is what we want to focus on. Okay. So for this particular use case, where based on the user selection of the tab, displaying the list, corresponding projects. Okay. For this particular scenario, what should be present in the state? Okay. Let's understand this. Okay. So firstly, what is state? So state is a JavaScript object, so which will have the information and that will change over the time corresponding to that component. So for a particular component, the data that is changing over the time will be maintained in the state, because once we update the state, the render method will be called and the entire UI will appropriately be updated. So that is the advantage of the state, right? So we will maintain the data that will change over the time in the state, right? So now for our particular use case, so what do we have to maintain in the state? So for that, we need to identify what is being changed over the time. Okay. So what are the changes that are happening over the time? So firstly, when based on the user action or based on the time, so what is being changing? So here in our particular case, based on the user action, that is selecting a particular tab item. So the active tab item is changing, right? You can see that when the user is clicking on responsive, the active tab item is changing to responsive. Then in case of dynamic, so it is dynamic. In case of static, it's static. So based on the user action, the active tab item is changing. And then also the projects list that is being displayed below is also changing over the time. So when the user clicks on a particular tab item, the active tab item is changing and the projects that are being displayed below are also changing over the time. So what do we have to do? We have to maintain both of these in the state. Okay, let's do that. So here you can see in the app component, so in the state, we are maintaining the active tab ID and the filtered projects. So we have initialized the active tab ID with the first tab, right? So you can see that is the reason we have written tab list of 0.tab ID. So that is the first tab present in the tabs list. Okay. And then the filtered projects, initially it will be an empty one. Okay. So we have initialized it in this manner. So now, actually if you observe, here we need not maintain the filtered projects in the state. Okay. Yes, filtered projects is changing over the time. Active tab ID is changing over the time, but there is no necessity of maintaining the filtered projects in the state. Let's understand why. Okay. So every time when the user is clicking on the tab item, the active tab ID will change. Okay. That is present in the state. It will change. Then the render method will obviously be called, right? So since we'll update the state because the active tab ID is changing. So we'll update the state. So when we update the state, the render method will be called. So since the render method will be called, so the entire thing present in the render method will get executed, right? So here what we can do is in the render method, we can filter the projects list based on the active tab ID. So the state has been updated with the active tab ID, right? So based on that, we can actually filter the projects list, right? So we have previously seen that in the projects list, there is category. So based on that category, we can filter the projects list. We can do that part in the render method itself. So we can get the filters projects list in the render method itself. So there's no need of maintaining that in the state object. So we just need to maintain the active tab ID. So once the active tab ID has been updated, then the render method will be called. In the render method, we'll filter the projects list and we'll get the filtered projects and then we'll display them in the UI. Okay, we can do that. So let's understand the flow. So when the user clicks on a particular tab item, okay, so then we'll update the active tab ID present in the state. Okay, so since the state has been updated, so then the render method will be called. In the render method, we will filter the projects list based on the active tab ID. Okay, then we'll get a list of filtered projects. Okay, then based on these filtered projects, we will update the UI. Okay, simple. So here we are trying to make the state as minimalistic as possible. Okay, so active tab ID, this is sufficient, right? Even you can maintain the filtered projects also, but so that is actually more data being stored in the state, which is unnecessary, right? Because we can do that in the render method. So we are trying to make the state as minimalistic as possible. Okay, so just with storing active tab ID, we can achieve the functionality. So there's no need of maintaining the filtered projects. It's not like adding filtered projects will do some harm or it will be an issue. No, but it's always a best practice to make the state as minimalistic as possible. Okay, that's the reason we just maintain the active tab ID. So whenever you're doing a particular project, try to understand the data that is being changed over the time. Okay, so then you have to place them in the state. Then try to make the state as minimalistic as possible. Like in our case, we first started off with active tab ID and filtered projects. Then we understood that there's no need of maintaining filtered projects in the state. So we have removed it from the state. Okay, so try to always observe what are the things changing over the time and what is necessary to be kept in the state and appropriately maintain that. Okay, that is a best practice that we generally follow in the industry. Okay, so do ensure these steps. Okay, now let's proceed further and complete our functionality. Okay, so as we understood, in the render method, we will get the filtered projects and then display the filtered projects. Okay, so let's write a method for it so that you can see get filtered projects. Okay, so in this, we are going to make use of the active tab ID present in the state. Okay, so we are accessing that. Then based on that, we will filter the projects list. So projects list dot filter, we are using the filter method. So in that, we are going to take each project detail and check whether the category matches with the active tab ID. So if you are selecting a static tab, okay, so only the projects corresponding to that static tab have to be displayed. So here we are going to check whether the category matches with the active tab, and then only those will be filtered, and then we are returning those filtered projects. So with this, we will get the filtered projects. Okay, so now when we are rendering the projects, instead of rendering all the projects list, so what we'll do, we'll only render the filtered projects. Okay, you can see instead of writing projects list.map, we are writing filtered projects.map. Okay, so with this, only the filtered projects, the projects corresponding to the tab will be displayed. Okay, this one point to note here. So you can see in the project item, we have added the key attribute. So previously we understood that when we are rendering a list of components, so it's important that you add this key attribute. Okay, so it's important that you write this. Here we are directly making use of the project ID since it's unique for each project ID. Okay, so you can directly make use of the project ID and display. Okay, so we have seen a lot of steps. Let's step by step implement them. Okay. So firstly, I'm coming back to the app component. So there's a render method here. So we have discussed about identifying the state. So what is the state that we have to maintain? So active tab ID. Okay, we'll initialize it with the first tab item. Okay, so it's present in the tabs list of 0.tab ID. Okay, we'll initialize with this. Then we understood that the projects list is also changing over the time, but there's no need of maintaining that in the state because we can do that in the render method. We want to keep the state as minimalistic as possible. So just with the active tab ID, we can achieve our functionality. So we are just maintaining this here in the state. Okay, so now in the render method, what do we have to do? Okay, so the first thing is based on the active tab ID, we have to get the filtered projects, right? So let's do that. Okay, let's write a method for it. Okay, so get filtered projects. Okay, so in this particular method, so what do we have to do? We have to filter the projects list based on the active tab ID. So where is the active tab ID present in the state? So let's access it. So active tab ID equal to this dot state. So we got the active tab ID. So now we have to filter the projects based on that. So let's do that. So filtered projects equal to, okay, and now so what is the entire projects list? Okay, this is this one, right? So this variable has the entire projects list. Now we have to filter this. So and we have to filter based on, so here we'll take each project details. Okay, so this category of this each project details should match with the active tab ID, right? So if this is true, so then the corresponding project has to be added into the filtered projects, right? So that's what we are doing here. Okay, finally, let's return these filtered projects. So we have written a method, so which will take the active tab ID, filter the projects list based on the current active tab, and will get the filtered projects. Okay, so now let's call this method here in the render. Okay, so we'll get the filtered projects. equal to this dot get filtered projects. Okay, with this we got the list of filtered projects. Okay, so now based on these filtered projects we have to display the projects below, right? So in the UI we have to display the based on these filtered projects. Previously what we were doing, so we have taken the entire projects list and we were displaying. So now what we are going to do, we are going to just make use of the filtered projects and we'll display them in the UI. Okay, so here an important point to note is we are making use of this key. Okay, we have to pass this key attribute. Okay, we previously understood about this. Directly I'm making use of this project ID since it's unique for each project item. Okay, so we are done with these changes, right? So what we have done, so based on the active tab item, so we are appropriately displaying the filtered projects. Okay, so let's try to see. Okay, so here you can see that now only 3 projects are being displayed, right? You can see previously there were so many projects. Now only 3 projects are being displayed because these are the projects corresponding to the static category, right? Initially our active tab is static. So the projects corresponding to this static are being displayed here, right? So you can see the output. So we have appropriately displayed the projects corresponding to a particular tab, right? Okay, so we have seen about this appropriately, right? And we have seen this output too. Okay, so here you can see the key attribute in the components that is being passed. Okay, let's have a look at this too. So let me just do inspect. Okay, so here when as we previously understood about the React developer tools, right? So in which the components and all these will be present. So here I'm clicking on components. So here you can see that there is header component, right? Then there are tab item components and then there are project item components. And as I mentioned that passing key is very important. So you can see for tab item there's key attributes, right? Similarly for project item we have the key attributes. Okay, so to understand what is the component structure and what are the props being passed and how are they being passed, to understand that you can make use of this React developer tools. Okay, so we have achieved this output. This is done. Okay, so now given an active tab ID, we are displaying the filtered projects. But when the user clicks on another tab item, we have to update the state. We have to update the active tab ID, right? So we are not done with that. So let's see how to update this state. Okay, let's do that. Okay, so for that in the app component we are writing a method update active tab ID. Okay, so to which the current active tab ID will be passed and then we'll update the state based on that. You can see that update active tab ID, to which the tab ID has been passed as an argument and then it has been updated in the state. So once the state has been updated, so then the render method will be called and then what will happen? So the next steps will proceed as usual, right? So the render method will be called and then the filter again will filter the projects and the projects corresponding to that will be displayed. Okay, clear? So now we have a method update active tab ID. Okay, when should this method be called? When the tab item has been clicked, right? So the tab item click functionality will be present inside the tab item component, right? So what we have to do is we have to pass this method as a prop to the tab item. Okay, so you understood this. So when we click on a tab item, okay, the on click functionality will be triggered inside the tab item, right? So that's where this update active tab ID, the state updation should be called. So we are going to pass this method as a prop to the tab item. Okay, and then in the tab item you can see there is a button to which we have added this on click functionality. Then the on click tab item will be called that method, in which we are calling this update active tab ID method. Okay, so with this, so the state will get updated. Since we are calling this update active tab ID, the state will get updated and then appropriately the projects will be filtered and be displayed. Okay, so here for this update active tab ID, we need to pass the tab ID which is present in the tab details. So we are getting that tab ID and we are passing that as an argument to it, and then the state will get updated and then the entire projects will get filtered. Okay, so let's do this. So as we understood that given a particular active tab ID, the projects have been appropriately filtered. But when we click on another tab item, right, so the state has to be updated, right? So that functionality is yet to be done. We are going to do that. So here you can see that there is active tab ID. We have to update this. So for this, we are writing a method. So update active tab ID. So in this, we are going to update the state. This dot set state. Okay, so to which we are going to in which we are going to update the active tab ID. Okay, so we'll pass the tab ID as an argument for this method, to which we'll update this. Okay, so in this update tag active tab ID method, we are updating the state, right? Okay, so this has to be called when a particular tab item has been clicked, right? So for this, what we are doing, we are passing that as a prop to the tab item because of on-click functionality is present inside the tab item, right? So that is the reason we are passing it here as an argument. Okay, so we are done passing this. Okay, so now what do we have to do? Okay, the next steps. Okay, so here for this on-click functionality of the tab item, okay, so we have to call this particular method, right? So let's do that. So let's go to the tab item component. So here in the tab item component, you can see there is button, right? So for this, when the user clicks on the tab item, then the on-click functionality of this button will be called, okay? So on-click equal to, okay, let's have a method for this. So on-click tab item, okay, and then we will pass it here, okay. So it's clear, right? So now in this particular on-click tab item, I have to call that update active tab ID, which I have passed, right? So that has been passed as an prop. So update active tab ID. This has been passed as a prop. I'm accessing it, and this method has to be called here when the tab item has been clicked, okay? To which we have to pass the tab ID as an argument. So how do we get it, right? So from the tab details, we can access the tab ID, okay? So I'm accessing that and I'm passing that as an argument to this. So now what will happen, okay? So when the user clicks on a tab item, then the on-click functionality will be called. So then this method will be called since we have passed it here, okay? So then this method will be called. So in which we are calling this update active tab ID with the corresponding tab ID. Okay, this is the current tab that has been selected. So that tab ID has been passed. Okay, so then what will happen? This method will be called. Okay, in which we are updating the state with the active tab ID. Okay, so the tab that has been selected, that tab ID is passed as an argument and will be updated as the active tab ID. So since the state has been updated, the render method will be called, then we'll again filter the projects and then we'll display the filtered projects. Okay, so the entire functionality is almost done, right? Okay, so now let's have a look at the output. Okay, so there's a small issue. So on-click tab item is not defined. Okay, let's see what happened. So this is so here you can see that I haven't written constant. So that's the reason we got that issue. Okay, so now you can see that currently the static has been selected. Now I'm clicking on responsive and you can see the list of projects displayed below have changed. So now I'm clicking on dynamic and you can see the list of projects displayed have been changed, right? You can see here. Okay, so based on the tab item that I'm selecting, the list of projects displayed below are appropriately being changed, right? See, we are done with this functionality, right? Okay. So we have seen this, right? And so we understood the flow that's happening here, right? So firstly, there's an app component in which we are displaying the tab items and the project items. In this, we have a state. So it's an active tab ID is the state that the data that is present in the state, right? And then to the tab item, we are passing the update active tab ID, this function, and also the tab details, right? So now coming to the tab item. So when the user clicks on a particular tab item, so then the on-click functionality will be triggered, right? So since the on-click functionality has been triggered, in that we are calling the update active tab ID method with the corresponding tab ID. So then in that method, we are updating the state. So the active tab ID is being updated. So since the state has been updated, so then the render method will be called and then the projects list has been filtered and appropriately it's being displayed. Okay, and we were able to see this output, right? So if you observe the React components there, you can see that there's app and there's header and all of these. So and based on the things that we are selecting, you can see the active tab ID is being updated in the state. Okay, let's have a look at this. Okay, so now we have seen the output. So let's have a look at the React components. Okay, so here we have the components. So now based on the component that we are selecting, okay, so here you can see, sorry, based on the tab item that we are selecting. So here you can see that when I clicked on responsive, in the state, the active tab ID has been changed to responsive. Just observe. Now I'm clicking on dynamic. So now again, it has been updated to dynamic. Appropriately, the state is being updated and then we are able to see the output, right? Okay. So you can see that there. So we have seen this output and we also understood about how to make use of the React developer tools and understand. In case if you're not getting the expected output, what you could do is just open the React developer tools, right? So see what's happening. Okay, so check whether the state is being updated according to your expectation or not. Okay, see whether the components are appropriate, whether the props that you want to pass are being appropriately passed or not. So by clicking on by doing various user actions and all, so then you will understand about what's exactly happening and you can debug in case if you have any issues. Okay, so make use of the React developer tools, the browser developer tools to understand your issues, to debug the code. It's very, very useful because in the software development, we make use of these developer tools and debug in case if we face any issues. Okay. So we are done with updating the state and appropriately displaying the projects list and also the and appropriately by clicking on the tab item displaying the projects list. It's based on the state change. You can see that when we were clicking on this tab item, right, we weren't able to understand which tab item is being selected, right? So but when we add styles like this, okay, you can see that it's clearly evident the tab item that we are selecting, right? So let's update the styles based on the change in the state. So once the active tab item has been changed, the appropriate styling also will update so that it will be clearly visible and more appealing like this. Okay, so let's do that. So for that, so firstly, okay, so we need to understand about which tab item is active, right? That is important. So when you are rendering a particular tab item, so we have to know whether it's active or not. So based on that, we have to apply the styling, right? So if it's an active tab item, there's a styling that needs to be applied. So if it is not, then there's a styling that needs to be applied. So when we are rendering a particular tab item, we have to know whether it's active or not. Okay, so for that, we are going to pass that information as a prop. Okay, so here you can see that based on the active tab ID, we are getting that from the state. Okay, if the active tab ID and the corresponding tab ID, okay, it matches, it means that it's the active one. Okay, if not, it's not the active. So in the prop, we are passing whether the corresponding tab item is active or not by checking the tab ID with the active tab ID. Okay, so once if it is active, okay, so you can see that. So when we are selecting a particular tab, okay, so the is active is appropriately being updated, right? You can see that. Okay, so based on this, we can appropriately update the styling, right? So let's do this step. So as we understood, right, to apply the styling that we want, so firstly we have to know whether the tab item is active or not. So for that, so when we are rendering the tab item, so we will pass another prop is active. Okay, so whether to know is active or not, how do we do? Okay, so we have to compare the tab details.tab ID with the active tab ID. Okay, so firstly let's access the active tab ID. So constant active tab ID equal to this dot state. So from the state we got this active tab ID. Let's compare that with the tab details.tab ID. If they both are equal, that means that tab item is active, otherwise it's not. Okay, so let's have a look at the output. Okay, so here now let me select a particular tab item. Okay, so now let me check responsive. So you can see that it is active is true. Now let me select dynamic. Okay, so now I'll go to dynamic and you can see is active is true, and whereas for responsive it's false and for statics it's false, right? So now if I select responsive, you can see for responsive it is true, for the remaining other two it is false, right? Similarly, you can check for that. Okay, so the is active is appropriately being passed as a prop. Okay, now based on this we have to apply the styling. Let's see how to do that. Okay, so is active is appropriately being passed. Now based on this we have to apply the styling. So you can see in the tab item component we are accessing is active, the is active prop. Okay, and based on that, if the is active is true, then active tab button, this class has to be applied for the styling, otherwise it should be an empty string. So this particular styling shouldn't be applied. Okay, so we are maintaining that in the active tab class name. So if is active is true, then it will have the active tab button. Okay, otherwise it will have an empty string. Okay, we are maintaining that. Now let's apply this to our tab item. Okay, you can see that. So for the button we are applying this styling. So previously it was class name equal to tab button. So now with the tab button we also have to apply this active tab class name. Okay, so it will be an empty string if it is not active. It would be active tab button if it is active. Okay, so here we can actually make use of the template strings. You can see that to include that active tab class name, that variable. So I've made use of this template strings. Okay, you can do this when we want to add multiple class names using the variables. Okay, you can see that. In this way, we are including that particular styling also. Okay, so with this, we will get an output in this manner. You can see that below, even in that elements, you can see the styling is appropriately being changed based on the ones that we are selecting. Okay, let's try to do this. So now, so as we understood, so we have passed is active to the tab item. So now based on this, we have to update the styling. So let's go to the tab item component. So here, this is the button. So already there's a class that is being applied, that is the tab button. Apart from this, additionally, if it is an active button, okay, we have the active tab item, then we have to apply the active tab button styling also. Okay, so firstly, let's access is active, this prop. Okay, so now based on this prop, okay, so active tab class name, okay. So whether it's active or not, so based on that, okay, so if it is active, so then it should be we should apply this active button, active tab button styling. Okay, if it's not, then we have to apply an empty string. Okay, clear? So this has the this variable contains the class that needs to be applied. So now we have to include this here. So since this is a variable, we can make use of the template string. Okay, so since it's a JavaScript code, so I'm making use of the flower braces, and within the template string, I'm going to include this variable. Okay, clear? So with this, based on whether it's active or not, the styling will be appropriately changed. Okay, I'm done with this. Now let's have a look at the output. Okay, so here you can see currently the static is the selected one, so you can see that it has the styling, now the responsive and the dynamic. Okay, you can see it here, right? Okay, so there you can see. So now let me inspect, and I'll also show you the changes that are happening. Okay, so here in this, so this is the tabs container. So here we have the various tab items. Okay, let me expand this and show you. Okay. Okay, so you can see that when I'm changing, so the styling is being changed here. Okay, just observe that. So appropriately based on the things that I'm selecting, so appropriately the styling is being changed. Okay, so you can observe that here you can make use of these developer tools, and in case if the styling is not being applied, just go to the browser developer tools and check whether it's being applied or not, what's exactly happening. Okay, so you can make use of these tools for that. Okay, so we are done with what we want to achieve, right? So based on the tab that we are selecting, right, the projects have been filtered. So we understood what should be kept in the state and how we can maintain the state in a minimalistic manner, right? At the same time, we have seen how we can change the styling based on the state change. Like here, the active tab ID is being changed. So based on the active tab ID change, so the styling for each tab item is being updated, right? So in this way, we have seen how we can achieve the various things. Okay. So let me quickly summarize today's session. So we have seen about identifying the state, about what data has to be kept in the state and how we can make it minimalistic, right? So do